Captain Marcus Whitfield had served the royal family for 23 years. His weathered hands gripped the ceremonial sword at his side as he stood at attention outside the throne room. The morning light filtered through the ancient stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor he had walked countless times before. Today felt different. The air in the palace was thick with tension, and whispers echoed through the corridors like ghosts of forgotten secrets. Marcus had heard the rumors, of course. Every guard, every servant, every noble in the kingdom had heard them. Queen Isabella was planning to change her title, to declare herself something unprecedented in their nation's 1,000-year history. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and Lord Chancellor Edmund emerged, his face pale and drawn. He avoided Marcus's questioning gaze and hurried past without his usual morning greeting. Something was definitely wrong. Marcus remembered the day he first took his oath to protect the crown. He was barely 20 years old then, fresh-faced and eager to serve. His father had been a royal guard before him, and his grandfather before that. The Whitfield family had protected the monarchy for 3 generations, through wars, political upheavals, and countless threats both foreign and domestic. The crown is eternal, his father had told him on that first day. Kings and queens may come and go, but the institution remains. Your loyalty is not to a person, Marcus. Your loyalty is to the crown itself, to what it represents, to the traditions that have kept our kingdom strong for a millennium. Those words had guided Marcus through every challenge he had faced. When King Robert died unexpectedly 5 years ago, leaving his young daughter Isabella to inherit the throne, Marcus had sworn his allegiance without hesitation. She was barely 25 then, untested and uncertain, but she was the rightful heir according to the ancient laws of succession. Isabella had proven herself to be intelligent and capable, though unconventional in her methods. She questioned traditions that previous monarchs had accepted without thought. She challenged the advisors who had served her father, often dismissing their counsel in favor of her own judgment. Some called her progressive. Others whispered that she was dangerous. The palace had been in chaos for weeks now. Secret meetings were held behind closed doors, and documents were passed between advisors with unusual urgency. Marcus had noticed the increased security measures, the extra guards posted at strategic locations, the way certain courtiers looked over their shoulders when they spoke. Yesterday, he had overheard a conversation between 2 senior advisors that made his blood run cold. They spoke of constitutional changes, of rewriting the fundamental laws that govern the monarchy. They mentioned words that had never been spoken in these halls before. Empress, supreme sovereign, divine ruler. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. These titles went against everything the kingdom stood for. Their constitution, written by the founding fathers of their nation, specifically outlined the limits of royal power. The monarch was meant to be a servant of the people, bound by laws and traditions that prevented absolute rule. The Queen's closest advisor, Lady Catherine, appeared at the end of the hallway. She was a sharp woman in her 40s who had gained considerable influence over Isabella in recent years. Marcus had never trusted her. There was something calculating about the way she moved through the palace, collecting information and planting ideas like seeds in fertile ground. "Captain Whitfield," Lady Catherine called out as she approached. "Her Majesty wishes to see you in her private study immediately." Marcus straightened his uniform and followed her through the winding corridors. His mind raced with possibilities. Why would the Queen summon him personally? In all his years of service, their interactions had been formal and brief. She had always worked through the chain of command, never addressing individual guards directly. The private study was a smaller, more intimate room than the throne room. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. Queen Isabella sat behind an ornate desk, her dark hair pulled back severely, her green eyes intense and focused. She looked older than her 30 years, as if the weight of the crown had aged her prematurely. "Captain Whitfield," she said without looking up from the document she was reading. "Please sit down." Marcus remained standing. "Your Majesty, I prefer to stand." She finally looked at him, and he saw something in her expression that he had never seen before. Uncertainty. For just a moment, the confident facade slipped, and he glimpsed the young woman beneath the royal exterior. I need to discuss something important with you, she said. Something that will affect the entire kingdom, including your role as captain of the Royal Guard. Marcus felt his heart beating faster. This was it. This was the moment he had been dreading. I have been working with my advisors on a series of reforms, Isabella continued. Changes that will strengthen our nation and ensure its prosperity for generations to come. These changes require adjustments to certain traditional protocols. She stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where courtiers strolled among the roses. The world is changing, Captain. Our neighboring kingdoms are evolving, adapting to new realities. If we cling too tightly to outdated traditions, we risk being left behind. Marcus chose his words carefully. Your Majesty, traditions exist for a reason. They provide stability and continuity. They connect us to our ancestors and guide us toward the future. Isabella turned back to face him, her expression hardening. Sometimes traditions become chains that bind us to the past. Sometimes they prevent us from reaching our full potential. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Marcus could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the expectations of all the guards who had served before him, the promise he had made to protect not just the Queen's life, but the institution of the monarchy itself. What exactly are you asking of me, Your Majesty? He said finally. Isabella returned to her desk and picked up an official-looking document bearing the royal seal. Tomorrow, I will announce my new title to the court and to the people. I will no longer be simply Queen Isabella. I will be Empress Isabella, supreme sovereign of the realm. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. The words hit him like physical blows. Everything his father had taught him, everything he believed about duty and honor and the sacred nature of the crown, rebelled against what he was hearing. Captain, Isabella continued, I need to know that I have your complete loyalty and support in this transition. The Royal Guard must stand united behind their sovereign, now more than ever. Marcus looked into her eyes and saw determination mixed with desperation. She needed his approval, his blessing, but she was asking him to betray everything he held sacred. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a mountain, and he knew that whatever he said next would change everything forever. Marcus stood in silence for what felt like an eternity, his mind racing through decades of training, tradition, and sworn oaths. The Queen waited, her fingers drumming nervously on the polished surface of her desk. Outside, the afternoon shadows grew longer, and the sounds of palace life continued as if the world wasn't about to change forever. Your Majesty, Marcus said finally, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I need time to consider what you've asked of me. Isabella's eyes flashed with something between anger and disappointment. Time, Captain, this is not a request for consideration. This is a direct order from your sovereign. I am informing you of a decision that has already been made. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. In all his years of service, he had never directly challenged the monarchy. He had followed orders without question, protected the royal family with his life, and maintained absolute loyalty even when he disagreed with their decisions. But this was different. This wasn't just another royal decree or policy change. This was an attack on the very foundation of everything he had sworn to protect. With all due respect, Your Majesty, he said carefully, my oath was not sworn to you personally. My oath was sworn to the crown, to the constitutional monarchy that has governed this realm for 1,000 years. The title you propose, it goes against our most fundamental laws. The Queen's face darkened. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the stone floor. Are you questioning my authority, Captain Whitfield? I am questioning the legitimacy of an authority that exceeds the bounds set by our Constitution, Marcus replied. The title of Empress implies absolute power, divine right, dominion over subjects rather than service to citizens. These concepts are foreign to our system of government. Lady Catherine, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Captain, perhaps you need to be reminded that the Queen has the power to dissolve Parliament, to appoint and dismiss ministers, to grant pardons, and to declare war. She already possesses considerable authority. Marcus turned to face her, his eyes cold. Considerable authority that is checked and balanced by Parliament, by the courts, and by the Constitution itself. What Her Majesty proposes would remove those checks and balances entirely. Isabella moved closer to Marcus, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Do you think I haven't considered the implications? Do you think this decision was made lightly? I have studied the histories of every great empire that has ever existed. I have analyzed the factors that led to their rise and fall. What I propose will strengthen our nation, not weaken it. Every dictator in history has believed the same thing, Marcus said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lady Catherine gasped audibly, and Isabella's face went white with rage. Marcus knew he had crossed a line from which there could be no return, but he couldn't take the words back. More importantly, he didn't want to. How dare you? Isabella whispered. How dare you compare me to common tyrants and despots? Marcus straightened his shoulders. I compare you to nothing, Your Majesty. I simply state a historical fact. Every ruler who has claimed absolute power has justified it as being for the greater good of their people. Isabella turned away from him, walking back to the window. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, but Marcus could hear the fury beneath the surface. Captain Whitfield, you are relieved of your duties. Report to the quartermaster and surrender your weapons and badge of office. You are no longer captain of the Royal Guard. Marcus felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. The decision had been made for him. Very well, Your Majesty. But I will not participate in tomorrow's ceremony. I will not stand witness to the destruction of everything my family has served for 3 generations. You will not only participate, Isabella said, turning back to face him. You will publicly endorse my new title. You will stand before the court and the people and declare your loyalty to Empress Isabella, Supreme Sovereign of the realm. Marcus shook his head. I cannot do that. Then you will be arrested for treason. The threat hit Marcus like a physical blow. Treason was punishable by death in their kingdom, a law that hadn't been enforced in decades but remained on the books. Isabella was not bluffing. Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. If you arrest me for refusing to recognize an illegitimate title, you will only prove that the title is indeed illegitimate. A true sovereign does not need to force recognition through threats and imprisonment. Lady Catherine stepped between them. Captain, perhaps we could find a compromise. You could simply remain silent during the ceremony. Your presence alone would be sufficient. Marcus looked at her with disgust. My silence would be interpreted as consent. My presence would legitimize what I believe to be a constitutional violation. I will not be party to either. Isabella laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Constitutional violation? Captain, I am the crown. The Constitution exists to serve the monarchy, not the other way around. If I choose to change my title, that is my prerogative as the sovereign ruler of this realm. That is exactly the kind of thinking that led to the civil wars of the 16th century, Marcus replied. When King Charles attempted to rule without parliament, when he claimed divine right superseded constitutional law, it nearly destroyed the kingdom. The reforms that followed those wars created the balanced system we have today. The reforms that followed those wars weakened the monarchy, Isabella countered. They turned kings and queens into ceremonial figureheads, dependent on the whims of politicians and the approval of commoners. I will not be a puppet dancing on strings pulled by others. Marcus could see that argument was useless. Isabella had made up her mind long before this conversation began. The meeting had not been about seeking his counsel or gaining his support. It had been about testing his loyalty, and when he failed that test, eliminating him as an obstacle. When will the arrest warrant be issued? He asked. Isabella considered the question. That depends on your actions between now and tomorrow's ceremony. If you attempt to leave the kingdom, if you try to contact foreign governments or opposition groups, if you make any public statements against my authority, the warrant will be issued immediately. Marcus nodded. And if I simply return to my quarters and wait? Then you will have until tomorrow morning to reconsider your position. Marcus understood the implied offer. He had one night to change his mind, to abandon his principles, to bow before the illegitimate authority she was claiming. One night to decide whether his oath to the crown was more important than his own life. I understand, Your Majesty, he said formally. By your leave, I will retire to my quarters. Isabella waved her hand dismissively. You are dismissed, former Captain Whitfield. Marcus bowed stiffly and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Isabella called out to him one last time. Marcus, she said, using his first name for the first time in their conversation. It doesn't have to end this way. You could have a place in the new order. You could serve as you always have, just under a different title. Marcus paused with his hand on the door handle. For a moment he was tempted. It would be so easy to simply accept the change, to continue his life as it had always been, to avoid the consequences of resistance. But then he thought of his father's words, of his grandfather's sacrifice, of all the guards who had died protecting the constitutional monarchy. Some things are more important than survival, Your Majesty, he said without turning around. Some principles are worth dying for. With that, he opened the door and walked out, leaving behind 23 years of service and stepping into an uncertain future where his life hung in the balance of his convictions. Marcus walked through the palace corridors with measured steps, his mind surprisingly clear despite the chaos of emotions swirling within him. Guards he had commanded for years watched him pass, confusion evident on their faces. Word traveled fast in the palace, and by now everyone would know that Captain Whitfield was no longer Captain Whitfield. His quarters were modest but comfortable, a suite of rooms that had housed the captain of the Royal Guard for over 2 centuries. The walls were lined with portraits of his predecessors, stern-faced men who had served with honor and distinction. Marcus wondered what they would think of his decision, whether they would see him as a hero or a traitor. He sat heavily in his leather armchair and poured himself a glass of whiskey from the bottle he kept for special occasions. The irony wasn't lost on him that this might be both a celebration and a wake. He was celebrating his integrity while mourning the end of his career and possibly his life. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, expecting perhaps one of his former subordinates coming to offer support or say goodbye. Instead, Lieutenant Sarah Coleman entered, her young face etched with worry. She had served under Marcus for 3 years and was one of the most promising guards in the royal service. Marcus had been grooming her for leadership, seeing in her the same dedication and principles that had guided his own career. "Sir," she said, standing at attention, "I heard about your meeting with the Queen." Marcus gestured for her to sit down. "Former captain will do now, Sarah. I'm no longer your commanding officer." She remained standing. "With respect, sir, you'll always be my commanding officer. What you did today, it took incredible courage." Marcus looked at her carefully. "What I did today might have been incredibly foolish. Courage and stupidity often look very similar from the outside." Sarah finally sat down, perching on the edge of a chair like a bird ready to take flight. "The other guards are talking. They're scared, confused. They don't know what to think about the Queen's announcement tomorrow." "What are they saying?" "Some think you're a hero for standing up to her. Others think you're a traitor for defying the crown. Most are just worried about their own positions and families." Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "But there's something else, sir. Something you need to know." Marcus set down his glass and gave her his full attention. "What is it?" "I've been doing some research into the legal precedents for what the Queen is trying to do. I stayed up all night in the palace library, going through old legal texts and constitutional documents." Sarah's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Sir, I don't think she has the legal authority to change her title without parliamentary approval." Marcus felt a spark of hope flicker in his chest. "Explain." Sarah pulled out a small notebook filled with her careful handwriting. "The Constitutional Reform Act of 1689 specifically states that any change to the royal title or the fundamental structure of the monarchy must be approved by a 2/3 majority in both houses of Parliament. The Queen cannot simply declare herself empress by royal decree. Are you certain about this?" "I've checked and double-checked. The law is clear. What she's planning to do tomorrow is not just morally questionable, it's illegal under our Constitution." Marcus stood up and began pacing. This changed everything. If Sarah was right, then his refusal to recognize the new title wasn't just a matter of principle. It was a matter of law. The Queen would be asking him to participate in an illegal act. "Have you told anyone else about this research?" Sarah shook her head. "I wanted to bring it to you first. I wasn't sure what to do with the information." "You were right to come to me," Marcus said. "But this puts you in danger too. If the Queen discovers that you're researching legal challenges to her authority, you could face the same charges I'm facing." "I've thought about that, sir. But if we don't act on this information, if we let her break the law without challenge, then what's the point of having laws at all?" Marcus felt a surge of pride in his former subordinate. Here was someone who understood what he had been trying to protect. Here was someone willing to risk everything for the rule of law. "There's more," Sarah continued. I spoke with some contacts I have in Parliament. Quietly, carefully. Several members are very concerned about the Queen's plans, but they're afraid to speak out publicly. They think she might dissolve Parliament if they oppose her. Can she do that legally? Only under very specific circumstances, and only with the approval of the Privy Council. But she's been replacing Privy Council members with her own supporters over the past year. She might have the votes she needs. Marcus felt the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about one man's refusal to recognize a title. This was about a constitutional crisis that could tear the kingdom apart. "What do you think we should do?" he asked Sarah. She looked surprised that he was asking for her opinion. "I think we need to contact the opposition leaders in Parliament. Let them know about the legal issues. Give them the ammunition they need to challenge her actions in court. That would definitely be considered treason, so as allowing a monarch to break the law without consequence." Marcus admired her clarity of thought, her willingness to see the situation in black and white, when everything felt gray and complicated. But he also worried about her youth and inexperience. The consequences of what she was suggesting could destroy not just their careers but their lives. Another knock at the door interrupted them. This time it was Marcus's old friend and fellow guard, Captain James Morrison, who commanded the palace security detail. "Marcus," James said as he entered without waiting for permission, "we need to talk." Sarah started to leave, but Marcus gestured for her to stay. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Lieutenant Coleman." James looked uncomfortable. "I've been asked to place you under house arrest." Marcus felt his stomach sink. "By whose authority?" "The Queen's. She's concerned that you might try to flee the kingdom or contact foreign agents. And you're going to comply with this order?" James looked genuinely pained. "Marcus, you know I don't want to do this. But she's still the Queen. I still have to follow orders." "Even illegal orders?" "The order isn't illegal. She has the authority to detain people she considers security threats." Sarah spoke up suddenly. "Actually, Captain Morrison, she doesn't." Both men turned to look at her. Marcus could see the determination in her eyes, the same fire that had driven him to take his stand. The Royal Detention Act of Isui, 1701 requires specific evidence of imminent threat to national security before the Crown can detain a citizen without trial. Captain Whitfield's refusal to recognize a title change doesn't constitute such a threat. James stared at her. "Lieutenant, I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation." "I understand it perfectly," Sarah replied. "The question is whether you understand the legal implications of what you're being asked to do." Marcus watched the exchange with fascination. Sarah was forcing James to confront the same choice he had faced in the Queen's study: follow orders blindly, or question whether those orders were legal and legitimate. James ran his hand through his graying hair. "This is getting out of hand. We're supposed to be protectors, not politicians." "Sometimes protecting requires political action," Marcus said quietly. "Sometimes doing our job means standing up to the people who give us orders." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, each wrestling with their own conscience. Outside the sun was setting and tomorrow's ceremony was less than 24 hours away. "I can't place you under house arrest," James said finally. "Not without proper legal authority. But I can't stop other guards from following the Queen's orders either." Marcus nodded. "I understand. You have to protect your own position." "No," James said firmly. "I have to protect the law. Just like you did today." Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Does this mean you're willing to help us contact Parliament?" James looked at both of them, these two guards who were asking him to risk everything for principle. "God help me," he said. "I think it does." Marcus felt hope growing in his chest. Maybe he wasn't alone after all. Maybe there were still people willing to fight for what was right, even when the cost was enormous. The battle for the soul of the kingdom was just beginning. The three guards worked through the night, their quiet rebellion taking shape in the dim light of Marcus's quarters. Sarah had spread constitutional documents across the coffee table, while James kept watch at the window for any signs of additional security. Marcus sat at his desk, carefully composing a letter that could either save the kingdom or cost them all their lives. "The key is timing," Sarah explained, pointing to a passage in an old legal text. "If Parliament can challenge the Queen's authority before she officially assumes the title, they can prevent the constitutional crisis from becoming permanent." James turned from the window. "But she's planned the ceremony for tomorrow morning. Parliament doesn't reconvene until Tuesday. Marcus looked up from his letter. Then we need to contact the Speaker of the House tonight. Get him to call an emergency session. The Speaker is Lord Pemberton, James said. He's been loyal to the Crown for 30 years. Why would he help us? Sarah pulled out another document. Because Lord Pemberton was one of the primary authors of the Constitutional Protection Act of 2010. He spent 2 years fighting for stronger safeguards against executive overreach. If anyone would understand the danger here, it's him. Marcus sealed his letter in an envelope and handed it to James. Can you get this to Lord Pemberton tonight without being detected? James took the letter, weighing it in his hands as if measuring the consequences it contained. I have a contact in his security detail, someone I trust. But once I deliver this, there's no going back for any of us. There was no going back the moment we decided to put the law above loyalty, Marcus said. The question now is whether we can succeed before the Queen realizes what we're doing. A soft scratching at the door made all three of them freeze. It was the signal Marcus had used with his guards for years. 3 quick scratches, pause, 2 more scratches. Someone was trying to communicate without alerting potential listeners. Marcus opened the door carefully to find young Private Thomas Walsh, barely 19 years old and one of the newest members of the Royal Guard. The boy's face was pale with fear and excitement. Sir, he whispered urgently, I need to tell you something. About tomorrow's ceremony. Marcus pulled him inside and closed the door. What is it, Walsh? I was assigned to security preparation for the throne room. While I was checking the perimeter, I overheard Lady Catherine talking to someone on the phone. She was speaking in a foreign language, but I recognized some of the words from my university studies. Sarah leaned forward. What language? Russian, ma'am. And she was talking about military advisors and something called Operation Crown being ready to proceed. The room fell silent. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Foreign military advisors suggested something far more dangerous than a simple title change. Are you certain about what you heard? James asked. Thomas nodded emphatically. I've been studying Russian for 3 years. Lady Catherine was definitely coordinating with someone about military support for the Queen's transition to, what did she call it? Absolute sovereignty. Marcus sat down heavily. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and the picture they formed was terrifying. This wasn't just about Isabella's ambition or her desire for more power. This was about a foreign influence operation designed to destabilize their constitutional monarchy. Sarah, he said urgently, what do you know about Lady Catherine's background? Sarah flipped through her notebook. She appeared at court about 2 years ago, claimed to be from a minor noble family in the northern provinces. The Queen took to her immediately, which surprised everyone because Isabella usually takes months to trust new advisors. Has anyone verified her background? I don't know. That would be handled by palace security. Sarah looked at James. Wouldn't your department have done a background check? James's face had gone white. Background checks for noble courtiers are usually cursory. We verify their claims about titles and property, but we don't dig deep into their personal histories unless there's a specific reason for suspicion. Marcus stood up and began pacing again. We need to assume the worst. If Lady Catherine is a foreign agent, then the Queen's decision to claim absolute power might not be entirely her own idea. Thomas spoke up hesitantly. Sir, there's something else. During the phone conversation, Lady Catherine mentioned that the assets would be in position by morning. She said something about securing key locations around the capital. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. Assets in position. Key locations secured. This sounded like preparation for a coup, not a ceremonial title change. We need to get word to Parliament immediately, he said, and to the military commanders. If foreign agents are involved in this, it's not just a constitutional crisis. It's a national security threat. James was already moving toward the door. I'll deliver your letter to Lord Pemberton and add a warning about the foreign connection. But Marcus, if we're right about this, they won't wait for a parliamentary challenge. They'll move against us tonight. Sarah gathered up the constitutional documents. I'll contact my sources in Parliament directly. Get them to start making calls to other members. We need to build opposition quickly. Marcus looked at Thomas, the young guard who had risked everything to bring them this information. Private Walsh, I need you to do something very dangerous. Can you get back to your security position without being noticed? Yes, sir. Good, keep listening. If you hear anything else about military movements or foreign coordination, Find a way to get word to us immediately. But be careful. If they suspect you're spying on them, your life will be in danger." Thomas straightened his shoulders. "I understand, sir. I won't let you down." As the three guards prepared to leave, Marcus felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. They were about to attempt something that could either save their kingdom or destroy it completely. If they succeeded, they would be heroes. If they failed, they would be traitors executed for high treason. "Before you go," he said, stopping them at the door, "I want each of you to understand what we're risking. We're not just challenging the Queen's authority. If we're right about foreign involvement, we're exposing a conspiracy that goes to the very heart of our government. The people behind this won't hesitate to kill us to protect their operation." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sir, my oath was to protect the kingdom from all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is exactly what I swore to do." James nodded. "I've served this crown for 15 years, but I won't serve a foreign puppet wearing a crown. If Isabella has been compromised, then protecting the kingdom means protecting it from her." Thomas, despite his youth, spoke with surprising conviction. "My grandfather died fighting foreign invaders in the last war. I won't let them take our country from within." Marcus felt a surge of pride in these three guards who were willing to risk everything for principle. They represented the best of what the Royal Guard had always stood for: loyalty to the kingdom above loyalty to any individual, even the monarch. "Then let's go save our country," he said. They left his quarters separately, melting into the shadows of the palace corridors like ghosts of the kingdom's conscience. Each carried with them pieces of information that could expose the conspiracy. But they also carried the knowledge that they might not live to see the sunrise. As Marcus made his way toward the communications center to send encrypted messages to military commanders he trusted, he thought about his father's words again. "Your loyalty is not to a person, Marcus. Your loyalty is to the crown itself, to what it represents." Tonight, protecting the crown meant protecting it from the woman who wore it. Tonight, serving the monarchy meant rebelling against the monarch. The irony was bitter, but Marcus had no doubt that his father would understand. Some principles were indeed worth dying for, and the constitutional monarchy they had sworn to protect was certainly one of them. The race against time had begun, and by morning, they would know whether their small rebellion could grow into something powerful enough to save the kingdom from itself. The palace communications center was deserted at 3 a.m, exactly as Marcus had hoped. He used his emergency access codes, which hadn't been revoked yet, to send encrypted messages to 3 military commanders he trusted implicitly: General Harrison, who commanded the capital garrison; Admiral Blackwood, head of naval intelligence; and Colonel Stevens, who led the elite special forces unit responsible for protecting government facilities. Each message was carefully worded to sound routine while conveying the urgency of the situation. Marcus couldn't risk being too explicit in case the communications were being monitored, but he trusted these men to read between the lines. They had all served together during the border conflicts 5 years ago, and they understood the code phrases he used to indicate a domestic threat. As he finished sending the last message, Marcus heard footsteps in the corridor outside. He quickly cleared the communication logs and moved to a filing cabinet, pretending to search for routine paperwork. The door opened and Marcus tensed, ready to bluff his way out of an awkward situation. To his relief, it was Lieutenant Coleman returning from her mission to contact Parliament members. But the expression on her face immediately told him that something had gone wrong. "We have a problem," she whispered urgently. "I reached Lord Pemberton's chief of staff, but he told me something disturbing. Several Parliament members have been placed under surveillance in the past week. Their phones are being monitored, their movements tracked." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How many members?" "At least a dozen, including all the senior opposition leaders and several moderate members of the Queen's own party. Anyone who might be expected to challenge her authority." The conspiracy was even more extensive than Marcus had feared. The Queen and her handlers hadn't just planned to announce a new title, they had systematically neutralized potential opposition in advance. "Did you manage to get word to anyone?" Sarah nodded grimly. "Lord Pemberton agreed to call an emergency session for first thing this morning, but he's not optimistic about getting enough members to attend. Many are afraid to leave their homes and others are being prevented from traveling by security concerns." Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. "What about James? Has he returned?" "That's the other problem. He should have been back an hour ago. I'm worried something happened to him. Before Marcus could respond, the communication console began beeping softly. An encrypted message was coming in on the emergency military channel. Marcus quickly decoded it, and his blood ran cold as he read the contents. The message was from General Harrison. Foreign military advisors observed at 3 locations around Capital. Request immediate clarification of their authority and mission. Recommend elevated security posture until situation clarified. Marcus showed the message to Sarah, who went pale as she read it. It's really happening, she whispered. They're moving foreign troops into position. Not troops, Marcus corrected. Advisors. But advisors who are probably coordinating with local assets to ensure the transition goes smoothly. Another message came through, this one from Admiral Blackwood. Unusual radio traffic detected from Embassy District. Multiple encrypted communications between unknown parties. Possible intelligence operation in progress. Marcus was beginning to understand the scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just a constitutional crisis orchestrated by an ambitious queen. This was a carefully planned operation involving foreign intelligence services, probably designed to install a puppet ruler who would be beholden to outside interests. We need to find James, he said to Sarah. If he's been captured, they'll extract information about our activities. We could all be compromised. Before they could leave the communications center, Private Walsh burst through the door, his face flushed from running and his uniform disheveled. Sir, he gasped, trying to catch his breath. Captain Morrison has been arrested. I saw them taking him to the detention cells in the basement. Marcus felt his heart sink. James had been caught, which meant their small rebellion had been discovered. It was only a matter of time before they came for the rest of them. Did you see who arrested him? Palace security, but they were led by men I didn't recognize. Foreign accents, military bearing. They're definitely not part of our regular forces. The foreign advisors were already taking active roles in palace security. The transition to absolute rule was happening faster than Marcus had anticipated. Sir, Walsh continued, there's more. I overheard Lady Catherine giving orders for your arrest. They're coming for you within the hour. Marcus looked at Sarah and Walsh, these 2 young guards who had risked everything to stand with him. He couldn't let them be captured because of his decisions. You both need to leave the palace immediately, he said firmly. Get out before they lock down the compound. Sarah shook her head. We're not abandoning you, sir. That's not a request, Lieutenant. That's an order. If you're captured, you can't help anyone. But if you escape, you can continue fighting from the outside. Walsh stepped forward. What about you, sir? You can't face this alone. Marcus smiled grimly. I'm not planning to face anything. I'm planning to disrupt their ceremony and expose their conspiracy in front of the entire court. Both young guards stared at him, as if he had lost his mind. Sir, Sarah said carefully, that would be suicide. They'll kill you before you can say a word. Maybe, Marcus admitted, but maybe not. They need the ceremony to appear legitimate. If I can create enough of a disturbance, raise enough questions about the legal authority for this title change, I might be able to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of the courtiers and foreign dignitaries who will be present. Marcus moved to his personal safe and withdrew several items. His father's service revolver, a small recording device, and a letter he had written earlier explaining the constitutional violations and foreign conspiracy. If I can record Lady Catherine or the Queen admitting to foreign involvement, it could provide evidence for future legal proceedings, he explained. And if I can't survive to deliver that evidence, at least one of you will be free to ensure it reaches the right people. Sarah and Walsh exchanged glances. Marcus could see they wanted to argue with him, to find another solution that didn't involve sacrificing their commanding officer, but they also understood the logic of his position. How will we know if you succeed? Sarah asked. Marcus handed her the recording device and a spare key to his quarters. If you don't hear from me by noon tomorrow, assume I failed. Take this evidence to General Harrison and tell him everything we've discovered. He's the only military commander I trust completely. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Marcus motioned for Sarah and Walsh to move toward the emergency exit at the back of the communications center. Go, he whispered urgently. Remember your oaths. Protect the kingdom, even if you can't protect the king. Sarah hesitated at the door. Sir, what you're doing? It's the bravest thing I've ever seen. Marcus shook his head. It's not bravery, Lieutenant. It's duty. The same duty that brought you here tonight, that made you risk everything for the truth. The footsteps were getting closer, Sarah and Walsh slipped out through the emergency exit, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus stood alone in the communications center, listening to the approaching sounds of his arrest. He thought about his father, about all the guards who had served before him, about the oath he had taken so many years ago. He thought about the kingdom he loved, the Constitution he had sworn to defend, and the people who depended on that Constitution for their freedom. The door burst open, and armed men in unfamiliar uniforms poured into the room. Marcus raised his hand slowly, a calm smile on his face. He had one more card to play, one final gambit that might save everything he had worked for. "Gentlemen," he said pleasantly, "I believe you're looking for me. I have information about a conspiracy against the crown that I think your superiors would be very interested to hear." The confusion on their faces told him he had guessed correctly. These foreign operatives didn't know he had discovered their involvement. They thought they were arresting a simple malcontent, not someone who could expose their entire operation. As they escorted him from the communications center, Marcus began to smile. The game wasn't over yet. In fact, it was just beginning. The throne room had never looked more magnificent or more ominous. Golden banners hung from the ancient stone walls, and hundreds of candles cast dancing shadows across the assembled crowd of nobles, foreign dignitaries, and court officials. Queen Isabella sat upon her throne in elaborate ceremonial robes, but Marcus could see the tension in her posture, the way her eyes constantly scanned the crowd for signs of trouble. Marcus stood in chains near the back of the hall, flanked by his foreign captors who had insisted he witness the ceremony before his execution. Lady Catherine had apparently convinced them that forcing the disgraced former captain to watch his defeat would send a powerful message to any other potential rebels. What Lady Catherine didn't know was that Marcus had spent his hours in captivity very productively. The foreign operatives had indeed been interested in his claims about knowing of a conspiracy against the crown. During his interrogation, he had carefully fed them information that painted himself as a loyal subject who had discovered a different conspiracy, one involving parliamentary leaders plotting to assassinate the Queen during the ceremony. The fiction was elaborate enough to be believable and had served two purposes. It convinced his captors that he was actually trying to protect Isabella, and it forced them to reveal details about their own operation as they tried to verify his claims. Marcus now knew exactly how extensive the foreign influence network was, and more importantly, he knew it was being directed from the embassy of Moldavia, a small nation that had been seeking to expand its influence in the region for years. As the ceremony began, Marcus watched the assembled crowd carefully. Most of the nobles looked nervous and uncertain. Several parliamentary members who had managed to attend kept exchanging worried glances. The foreign dignitaries seemed overly interested in the proceedings, taking notes and photographs with unusual intensity. Lord Chancellor Edmund stepped forward to begin the formal proceedings, but Marcus could see the reluctance in his movements. The old man had served 3 generations of monarchs and clearly understood the constitutional implications of what was happening. "Lords and ladies of the realm," Edmund announced in a voice that carried across the throne room, "we gather today to witness a historic transformation in our ancient monarchy. Her Majesty Queen Isabella has determined that the challenges facing our kingdom require new approaches and expanded authority." Marcus noticed several nobles shifting uncomfortably. The careful wording couldn't disguise what was really happening, and these people weren't fools. They understood that they were witnessing the end of the constitutional monarchy their ancestors had fought to establish. Queen Isabella rose from her throne, and the room fell silent. She looked regal and commanding, but Marcus could see the small signs of nervousness, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she avoided making eye contact with certain members of the nobility. "My loyal subjects," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. "For 1,000 years, our kingdom has been guided by traditions and laws that served us well in simpler times. But the world has changed, and we must change with it." Marcus found himself holding his breath. This was the moment of truth. If Isabella proceeded with claiming the title of Empress, she would be breaking the law and potentially triggering a constitutional crisis that could tear the kingdom apart. "Today, I claim a new title that reflects the reality of our nation's needs and my commitment to its prosperity. I declare myself Empress Isabella, supreme sovereign of the realm, with authority granted not by parliament or nobles, but by divine right and the will of destiny itself. A murmur of shock and dismay rippled through the assembled crowd. Several nobles stepped forward as if to object, but they were immediately confronted by the foreign security personnel who had been strategically positioned throughout the hall. Marcus knew this was his moment. The recording device Sarah had given him was hidden in his sleeve, activated and capturing everything. But more importantly, he had information that could expose the entire conspiracy. "Stop," Marcus shouted, his voice cutting through the confused murmur of the crowd. "This ceremony is illegal and illegitimate." Every eye in the throne room turned toward him. Queen Isabella's face went white with rage while Lady Catherine stepped forward with obvious alarm. "Silence this traitor," Isabella commanded. But Marcus was already speaking, his voice trained from years of military command to carry across large spaces. The Constitutional Reform Act of 1689 specifically prohibits any change to the royal title without parliamentary approval. "This ceremony violates our most fundamental laws." Several nobles began nodding in agreement. Lord Pemberton, who had managed to attend despite the surveillance, stepped forward with obvious relief at having someone else voice the legal objections. Furthermore, Marcus continued before anyone could stop him, "This entire operation is being directed by foreign agents working for the Moldavian intelligence service. Lady Catherine is not who she claims to be." The accusation hit the throne room like a thunderbolt. Lady Catherine's composed facade cracked, and Marcus saw her hand move toward something concealed in her robes. "These are the desperate lies of a condemned traitor," she called out, but her accent had changed subtly, revealing hints of her true origins. Marcus pressed his advantage. "Ask her about Operation Crown. Ask her about the military advisors positioned around the capital. Ask her about the communications between the Moldavian embassy and this palace." The crowd was beginning to panic. Foreign dignitaries were moving toward the exits. Nobles were clustering together in confused groups, and the foreign security personnel were trying to maintain order while receiving urgent instructions through their earpieces. Queen Isabella stood frozen on the dais, clearly unsure how to respond. Marcus could see the moment when she began to understand that she had been manipulated, that the advice she had received about claiming absolute power had not come from loyal subjects but from foreign agents pursuing their own agenda. "The evidence is in the palace communications logs," Marcus shouted. "General Harrison has been investigating unusual military activity around the capital. This entire ceremony is part of a foreign intelligence operation." At that moment, the throne room doors burst open, and General Harrison himself strode in with a contingent of loyal soldiers. Behind him came Admiral Blackwood and Colonel Stevens, the military commanders Marcus had contacted the night before. "By order of the Emergency Security Council," General Harrison announced in a voice that brooked no argument, "this ceremony is suspended pending investigation of foreign intelligence activities within the palace." The foreign security personnel reached for their weapons, but they were vastly outnumbered by the legitimate military forces now surrounding them. Lady Catherine tried to flee toward a side exit, but she was quickly apprehended by Colonel Stevens's special forces. Queen Isabella finally found her voice. "General Harrison, what is the meaning of this?" "I am your sovereign, Your Majesty," the general replied respectfully but firmly. "You are indeed our sovereign, which is why we are here to protect you from those who would use you for their own purposes. The investigation will determine the extent of foreign influence in recent palace decisions." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. His desperate gambit had worked. The conspiracy had been exposed, the ceremony had been stopped, and the constitutional monarchy had been preserved. As the foreign agents were led away in custody and the shocked nobles began to disperse, Queen Isabella approached Marcus. Her face was a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and what might have been gratitude. "Captain Whitfield," she said quietly, "it appears I owe you an apology." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "Your Majesty, you owe me nothing. But you do owe the kingdom an explanation and a recommitment to constitutional governance." Isabella nodded slowly. "The investigation will reveal the truth about how I was deceived and manipulated. But you're right about my obligations to the kingdom. I let my frustration with the limitations of constitutional monarchy cloud my judgment. Power without limits corrupts without exception, Your Majesty. The limitations aren't weaknesses, they're protections." As Marcus was freed from his chains and his rank restored, he thought about the long night that had led to this moment. Sarah and Walsh would soon return to receive commendations for their courage. James would be freed from detention and honored for his sacrifice. The foreign conspiracy would be thoroughly investigated and exposed. But most importantly, the kingdom would continue to be governed by laws rather than whims, by constitutional principles rather than absolute power. The oath Marcus had taken so many years ago, to protect the crown and what it represented, had been fulfilled in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes protecting the crown meant protecting it from itself. Sometimes loyalty required the courage to say no, and sometimes the greatest service a guard could provide was to guard against the very authority he was sworn to serve. As the sun set on this historic day, Marcus stood once again at his post outside the throne room, back in uniform, back in service, but forever changed by the knowledge that he had helped save his kingdom from the very people who ruled it. The crown endured, the Constitution survived, and the eternal vigilance required to protect both continued with renewed purpose.